Hello everyone, welcome back to Tool Time Tuesday, and March's theme for Tool Time Tuesday is stamping. Now stamping is something that I love to do when I'm working on my layouts and mixed media projects. So I thought what I'd do today is I'll just show you a few layouts that I've done previously, and then I'll do a quick rundown as to how I put together a layout using stamps and stamped images as embellishments. So let's look at this layout number 1. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. So with stamps, I will often use them as embellishments, and this is a really good example here where I've used some Vicky Bouton stamps, which are these gorgeous leaves here, and these flowers. So it's a simple process of, with the flowers, stamping on some white cardstock using a black ink, cutting them and adding a little bit of colour to them, which is also some ink. In this case it is, I think, Tim Holtz's Side Distress, which is called Mustard Seed. It's a gorgeous, nice, warm yellow. And then with these lovely branches, and I will just lift it up so you can see them. What I've done is I've actually stamped with the black ink onto some mixed media paper that I've created. So you'll see some of the leaves have some splatters. Some of them have different tones of green. And it is all just paper that I've made myself, and then stamped the image and fussy cut them out to use as embellishments. Also on this layout, I've stamped directly onto the cardstock, which is behind. So these leaves through the back here are just stamped directly onto the background. And then on top of that, I've used other mixed media, including some stencils, to just give it more texture and interest in the layout. Over here, I've also used some stencils with some text to create a bit of texture in the background, a bit of interest. But what you can do, of course, you can stamp that in as well. So it's quite easy to use stamps within scrapbook layouts. Some people are a little bit daunted by it. I would recommend that the first thing you give a go of is trying just to create some embellishment pieces with your stamps. One of my favourite stamps to buy and purchase are insect stamps. So I will often buy a lot of stamps that have foliage, flowers, definitely insects. And I tend to use them a lot because I do a lot of gardening layouts. And they also work well for anything that's summertime. Sometimes it will even work if you're doing some cooking layouts. So embellishments is my number 1 tip for using stamps and layouts. The other thing I like to do is stamp backgrounds. So if we look at this one here, I've added some mixed media Distress Oxide ink using just the smooshing technique with the plastic bag. But on top of that, I've stamped some wooden log images to go with this layout about my husband having to cut and chop all the wood for winter. Winter is coming. So another great way to use those stamps, use them to embellish your background and make it more interesting by also adding in a little bit of mixed media. Some of you will have seen this layout before. This is one of my favourite ones that I've done in the last year, where I've used a lot of stamps. So this whole background piece, circular design here, is using stamps. I masked off different areas with pieces of card and paper, and I stamped each individual separate area with different images, using a lot of my favourite foliage images. There's some Tim Holtz insects in here. There's some other insects as well, some Tim Holtz mushrooms. There is some Tim Tim Holtz, what would we call them, ticket stubs throughout as well, and some text. There's a cute little ant, which is one of the Tim Holtz ones. So you can see how you can create a whole paper just on white cardstock, just using stamps and inks. And to mask it, you would literally just cutting a shape and blocking that area out while you stamp the other section. It's quite a simple technique. If you'd like to know more about that, you can actually go and watch my video about this particular layout. You'll be able to find it just because it shows the image of this on the front of it. So go and have a look. If that interests you and you'd like to give it a go, it looks tricky. It's really not. It's really quite simple. And as long as you've got a good variety of stamps, you can get a really interesting effect. Next one is also one where I've used quite a few of those insect stamps. So what I've done in this case, though, I wanted to show you, is that I've used acetate. So instead of cardstock, stamping on cardstock, I've stamped on acetate. And then I coloured the back of these butterflies. There's also a video about that if you're interested in having a look at that. Really important if you're trying to stamp with acetate that you use the right ink. And in this case, what we need to use is one of our StazOn inks. So the StazOn inks come in many colours and are really great for stamping on any surface that's slippery. So these black ones, I've used this jet black StazOn, but I've done acetate leaves and branches and things in the past, and these greens and browns work beautifully for that. You can also get a StazOn white, which would look quite effective as well. So just another way to create your own embellishments, save a bit of money in the same time, and get quite creative using some acetate and stamps and ink to create your own embellishments. Now let's have a look what I'm going to work on today. So I've jumped ahead a bit, and you can see that I've already stamped some beautiful flowers here and different types of foliage. And the reason I've gone with these particular ones obviously is because my photos are of what's called a pig face flower. Now these flowers aren't exactly the pig face flower, but they're close enough that I can use this image for my photographs. If we have a look at the stamp, it's a Studio Light stamp, which is called Wildflowers. So you've got lots of images in here, and I've used all of these in different ways here. So let's talk about what I've used. For stamping this time, I didn't use StazOn. I used Spectrum Noir Finesse ink. Gives a fine and crisp image, works really well. It's also great if you want to use any alcohol markers to colour in your images with, and that's why I've chose to use it. Now, you don't have to, of course, use alcohol markers to do your colouring in. You can use any type of markers. For some of these, I used the Uniquely Creative markers. They have their own ones, which are called Uniqolour. So I use some of these. You can also use your ordinary markers that kids use. These actually work fantastically with any colouring of stamped images. Not only can you colour directly, but they also work really well when you use a water brush. So you can use them, just colour on a surface, just anything, a plate, anything that's got a smooth surface. You can colour the texture straight on, and then you can use your water brush or a paintbrush with a bit of water to pick up that colour and paint in your image. So lots of versatility in these. They also blend really well. So if you're just starting out and you just want to have a play with stamps and you want to try out how to color, don't worry about buying expensive markers. It's not really necessary. You can color anything with some simple textures that your kids use. In this case, that depends. All right, so what I also did, just to change it up the look a bit, is I used different materials to stamp on. So I'll just see if you can see this. I'll pull this one out here. And hopefully if I move it, you'll be able to see what I mean. Can you see how the light is hitting that? And that is because I've stamped onto glossy cardstock. And what I actually stamped onto was photograph paper. I happen to have some really big 12 by 12 sheets of photograph paper. But any white glossy cardstock would do the trick. It just gives you this extra element to layout. So I've done some with that gloss and then some with ordinary matte paper. So if I move both of them, there's a definite difference as to how they look. And it will just add some more texture and interest when I layer them up on my layout. The other thing I did was I used some paper which had some ink cleanup on it, and I really mean that. It was just paper. Here we go. Here's my scrap that's left. It was a bit of paper that I cleaned a stamp on. So I had this bubble stamp I was stamping with, and it still had quite a bit of ink on it, and I just cleaned it off onto some paper. So I got this nice green and light tan pattern coming through the paper. So I decided that I would stamp some of these little foliage images onto that paper. And you can see some are really green and some are a bit browner. Some have a lot more white to them. But once again, when you put it all together and I put the layout together, it's going to add interest to the layout because there's different color combinations. We've got different surfaces with our gloss and with our matte surfaces, and then with our printed ink surfaces. Now, I've got 3 photos to work with. I've got my embellishments, and I'm using this background, which I made in one of my other videos about how to make your own backgrounds with watercolor, I think it was, and doing resist technique. So this was a very fun layout background that I created, which has all this fine line texture through here. It's quite lovely. So we're using that for our background. I'm using these. I will come back to you with the finished layout, and then we'll talk about what I did. Okay, well, I've finished it, and here it is. So basically what I've done is just much like arranging flowers, I've arranged my embellishments that I made from stamped and coloured images. So because I had flowers contained in baskets, I've put these on so they're loose and flowing, and they're kind of creating a frame around my photos. And then I've put a simple Vickers petal, which is Vicky Bouton's one. So there you go, that's it, it's finished. You can see how effective and easy it is to use stamps and create some beautiful embellishments that you can use on your layouts or cards or mixed media. Thanks for watching. Next month, make sure you do check in to find out what we're doing on Tool Time Tuesday.